Well, greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to today's bonus. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. Finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go, and yes, folks, they definitely matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's bonus, shall we? Today's first part of the upload. In October of 1941, a hunter in Jefferson County, Illinois, near the city of Mount Vernon, had a close encounter with a baboon-like creature in the woods. Reverend Harpole was squirrel hunting in the woods along the bottoms around Gum Creek when a creature that resembled a baboon jumped out of a tree, striking him squarely in the head. The Reverend's hat was knocked clean off his head, and the pipe he was smoking flew out of his mouth. The creature, which had dark brown hair, was making weird sounds as it jumped up and down. The fun and games were over when the unpredictable creature decided to deliver an attack on the man of cloth. The Reverend Harpole was someone not to be underestimated. Because he swiftly smacked the creature with the barrel of his trusty shotgun, the monster leapt backward and then took off in the opposite direction. The Reverend instinctively raised his shotgun, squeezed the trigger, and fired a thunderous warning shot into the air. The loud reverberation of the shot sent the monster retreating into the bushes. For the duration of the year afterward, a number of people around Mount Vernon continued to report a creature that was believed to be the same one. They said it was baboon-like in appearance, and it could leap distances of 20 feet. At night, the locals could hear the monster screaming in the wooded bottom land lying along the Gum Creek. After that, the monster was spotted in other nearby communities. One individual encountered the beast as it ran across the road in front of his vehicle along the Big Muddy River in Jackson County, 40 miles southwest of Mount Vernon. It was reported to have killed a dog about 7 miles south of Mount Vernon at the small town of Bonnie, Illinois. Armed search parties carrying all types of paraphernalia to capture or kill this beast were sent to search for this creature. They scoured the trees and brush along Gum Creek bottoms without any success. Hunters claimed that they had a difficult tracking the beast because it was constantly on the move, and it was able to leap distances of 20 feet or more in a single bound. After that, the monster was not heard of again. Reverend Harpole's brother, another Reverend Harpole, served as his character reference and vouched for his credibility. Today's second part of the upload. There have been many sightings of a creature in the Appalachian Mountains of the United States, including among those sightings is one that took place at West Point, Kentucky one night. Wyman and Marva Morgan were alerted to their commotion taking place outside of their house one fateful night back in the early 70s. Marva Morgan went to the window to look outside and saw a strange figure that resembled a kangaroo baboon type creature just a few feet away. The animal had sharp claws and sharp fangs protruding from its mouth and stood on its strong hind legs to the height of 7 feet. Something had been raiding their garbage cans recently, and tonight it was back doing the same. Things were different this time because when it was approached by their dog, the vicious creature tore into the dog and ripped the dog to shreds, resulting in its death. The couple ran outside in an attempt to rescue the dog, but the monster made its getaway. The creature did leave something behind, an unmistakably strong, pungent smell. Today's third part of the upload. In Coweta County, Georgia, a series of strange encounters with a monkey-like creature occurred during August of 1979 in the town of Noonan. It was mostly seen in the areas around Belk Road, and several of the initial sightings were near the intersection of Belk and West Washington Street. Mary Stozer and her family were among the first to witness this creature. It's described as having a face like a monkey in some cases, while others say it resembled a dog. It had a long, bushy tail that was covered in black fur. It stood about 5 feet tall. Its eyes were reported to sparkle or glow brightly in the night. Most witness accounts described the large monkey-like creature as bipedal, but some claimed that at times it was both bipedal and quadrupedal. The creature, which some thought bore a likeliness to a large wild dog, was actually reported by one of the witnesses who saw it digging holes in one of her flower beds. Soon the monster laid claim to its very own name and was labeled the Belk Road Booger. Law enforcement officers from Coweta County Sheriff's Department and the Noonan Police Department, also the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, investigated several of the incidents, and they could not substantiate the existence of the creature. A local DNR officer placed traps at key locations in an effort to capture the monster. Some of the locals believed that the creature was making its home in nearby barns or junk cars at a nearby salvage yard. It was thought to be feeding on nearby abundant supply of apples or corn. Additional sightings of the Belk Road Booger occurred less than 3 miles to the northwest of Noonan, in the Meadowview subdivision near the Arnco Mills area. The witness in the sighting, Nancy Jackson, was scared half out of her wits by what she describes as the ugliest animal she had ever seen. Other sightings that occurred within the same locality on Smoky Road, Welcome Sargent Road, and Ishman Ballard Road. Around that same time, a creature of the same description was seen running away from a barn in the eastern part of Noonan. It was seen again jumping over a wall in that same area in the early part of the 80s. Another woman also saw the creature along the street in the same area. A newspaper story about the mysterious animal, titled "Strange Creature Seen Here," first appeared in the August 9th, 1979 edition of the Noonan Times-Herald. Other articles on the creature soon followed in the same newspaper, until the monster finally quit showing up. It wasn't until 2005 that it was believed that the Belk Road Booger had returned. Around that time, a woman was driving eastward on State Route 16 from Noonan, Georgia, towards Senoia, Georgia, about 6 miles from Noonan. Near the Poplar Road intersection, she saw a creature that met the same description. One exception was the fact that this one was 8 feet tall. As she drove up a hill, the creature passed from the left side of the road to the center of the road, which prompted her to slow down. As she drove past the creature, it was so close to the driver's side of the car that it was almost a near collision. More sightings in the similar nature occurred, but since the new monster was much larger, it was given a different name. It became known as the Happy Valley Horror, because it was first seen walking in a field 5 miles north of Noonan in a wooded upscale residential area known as Happy Valley Circle. Later, it was observed multiple times by different members of the Robarbs family as it walked along Cedar Creek Road near its intersection with Happy Valley Circle. Today's fourth part of the upload, Danville, New Hampshire. Danville is a town of a population of 4,400 located in Rockingham County, New Hampshire. On September 9th, 2001, it laid claim to its very own sighting of the Dogman. On that night, the Danville fire chief, David Kimball, was driving through town, and he was at a nearby intersection of Pleasant Street and Kingston Road when he saw a creature. It appeared to be a large primate around 3 to 4 feet tall. It displayed a reddish-brown coat, a dog-like snout, razor-sharp teeth, strong hind legs, and short front legs that terminated in long claws. The creature jumped out onto the road, staring at the witness, and then it leapt and hopped on down the road. 11 other residents of Pleasant Street, included a 58-year-old Vivian Wicker, were also witnesses to the strange creature, and its shrill hooting and howling as it made its getaway into the darkness. After the first sighting, there were at least 9 more sightings reported during the following 2 weeks. The people of Danville were very frightened, especially when they learned that the creature stood as much as 8 feet tall. Search parties were sent out several times during the month of September to look for this creature, but their efforts were unsuccessful. Dogs were utilized as part of these search parties, but it was soon discovered that they would refuse to track the beast. It appeared that the creature had finally moved out of town and into the nearby mountains. It could sometimes be heard howling at night, and the residents of Rockingham County were in a panic about the thought that something which could be very dangerous was lurking near their homes. Several more times a scary primate turned up in the town of Danville. An NBC TV news team showed up at one point to cover the story. At some time, the Dogman did not show up again. Some believed that this beast had escaped from captivity at a zoo, a circus, someone's personal collection of exotic animals. The Dogman of Rockingham County was never heard from again until 14 years passed. In 2015, local news media published a story. Witnesses reported that they seen a dangerous-looking creature meeting the same description of the monster that had been seen years earlier, dragging the body of a young child, or at least a baby doll. After some time had passed, no children were actually reported missing, but members of the community of Danville and the outlying areas of Rockingham County were still spooked by the whole affair. Today's 5th encounter. So a few months ago, I was up north. I live in Michigan, and I was visiting our neighbors up there. It was around 12 or 1 in the morning. They have a lot of dogs. They'd gone into the house to do something, and I stayed and sat at the picnic table. I heard panting and heavy breathing coming from nearby, so I assumed one of their dogs was hurt. I got up and went to the dog kennels and looked at the dogs. One of the dogs, who had been marked as missing for a few days, was standing over one of the smaller ones, and now mutilated dog. I, of course, assumed the dog had rabies, but thinking back that night, the dog did not look just ill. It almost looked deformed. The back legs seemed too long, and its face did not look right. Of course, it could have been a trick of the light, but it was definitely terrifying. Today's 6th part of the upload. Duncansville is an unincorporated community in Adams County, Ohio. It is geographically located in the Appalachian Mountains to the west of Ohio's Shawnee State Forest. The area is endowed with sort of magic because not far away is the mysterious Serpent Mound, and there has also been a nearby church with the image of Christ burned into the surface of the door. At nearby Peach Mountain is a GE testing facility where a number of strange things such as Bigfoot sightings and UFO encounters have occurred. However, the strangeness doesn't end there. On June 26, 1997, Duncansville was also the site of an encounter with a strange monkey dog-like creature. The incident took place at the residence of Debbie Cross, which was situated about 5 miles northeast of town. The property is described as a wooded ridge near Peach Mountain. On that particular night, shortly after midnight, Cross was in her living room watching television when she was alerted to a disturbance outside of her home. Her dogs were barking frantically, so she went to the door to see what was causing the ruckus. She flipped on the bright porch light and saw something moving near a pond that was located in her front yard, about 30 feet away. She was able to clearly see the strange creature about 5 feet tall that was covered with gray fur, about 1 to 2 inches in length. It displayed large, dark eyes that were recessed into its face, and it had a short, rounded ears. The animal had a short tail and long arms. The animal watched her for a few seconds and then moved on the opposite side of the pond. Its method of locomotion consisted of kind of like a hopping or skipping motion combined with walking on its hind legs while occasionally supporting itself with its arms by resting its knuckles on the ground. During the time that all this was taking place, the animal emitted a gurgling or growl sound. The dogs took off in pursuit as the creature moved away from the house, but Cross was able to call them back. As the creature moved further away, it followed a barbed wire fence until it gradually disappeared from her sight. Later, she heard a screeching sound that she believes came from the creature. Today's 7th encounter. I'm a freelance software engineer. Firms hire me as needed for periods that range from weeks to months to years, depending on what the work entails. Because of this makeshift lifestyle, I am afforded a fair amount of free time, which I generally use for exercise and adventure. Cross-country skiing and hiking are two of the things that I enjoy the most. However, I generally do not go far from home to do either of these, my home being a small chalet constructed on a plot of land abutting a protected wilderness. I don't remember exactly how much land lies behind me, but it is enormous and consists of millions of acres. So I typically hike and ski there. You couldn't ask for a better location, and in all the years I have been living here, I have not so much as once run into another human being in the woods. In the winter of 2008, my best friend and I broke out the skis for some exercise. We never clock our distance or map our paths. The enormous amount of untouched land affords us a plethora of trails to follow, spanning out in any number of directions, and when the snow has fallen, the potential for pathways is virtually endless. Generally, we go as far as we feel we can go while still saving enough juice to return home. Typically, I would say that we can travel between 15 to 20 miles in a single outing. On this day, we were skiing on pure virgin snow, and if you were to look around, the only visible marks upon it were some small animal tracks here and there. Having gotten 10 inches of the white stuff overnight and the temperature was about 25 degrees Fahrenheit, we were fairly deep into our outbound ski when we came upon a debris field and quickly realized that what we were looking at was the strewn about remains of rotten tree's interior. We could see that the rotten wood and chips extended about 20 feet or so from the tree, and it was clear that the destruction had happened this morning, because there wasn't so much as a flake of snow covering the debris, with the snow having stopped falling at around 4 this morning. We could clearly see the entire area in front of the tree was completely matted down, indicative that something must have stood in front of this decaying tree for some time, as it tore apart its interior. We also noticed a straight line of gigantic footprints both coming to and moving away from the tree, which were fresh and similar in shape to those of a human. As we crouched down to examine them, we could clearly see toes, but they were slightly splayed apart. Additionally, the big toe was somewhat angled inward, unlike a human's. It was so perfectly imprinted in the snow that it almost looked like it had been a cast, with many of the prints still having snow raised up between the individual toes. I snapped out of my skis and stood next to the print in order to size it up against my own. The footprint was approximately 12 inches longer than my ski boot, which would make its length about 24 inches. Its width between the toes was about twice the size of mine, which would make it around 10 inches, though it could have been a bit more. Between the snow that had fallen overnight and that which had already been on the ground, there was about a foot of snow in total. The snow was completely compressed within the print, being pressed all the way down to the pine needles. Whatever this thing was, it had to be incredible. Even with my boots on and jumping and stomping down into the snow, I couldn't come close to the degree of compression this thing had created while it casually walked. There was no melt in the prints, and very little snow had collapsed within them. They were very, very fresh, and because there was no wind that day, there was also no freshly blown snow covering the prints as well. They were as perfect could be. The stride length of the creature that would have left these were incredibly long. We laid one of the skis in front of the toes of one print, and even though my skis are about 7 feet long, it came up short of the next print, almost by 2 feet. That made these steps almost 9 feet from toe to toe. We decided to put our skis back on and try to follow the return trail for a while. It paralleled the entry trail for a mile or so before beginning to veer east into the woods, which leads to some heavy timber. After about 2 miles or so, we ran across another tree that had been torn apart. This one was nothing like the first, as it appeared that this thing had approached another tree thinking that it was more rotten than it actually was. After it had dug into the bark about an inch or two, it had found the tree was fairly solid at its core. It was apparent to both of us that this thing had to have been walking through the timber and sampling decayed trees as the trail then continued outbound into the forest. Since there was no end in sight, we didn't want to follow the trail any further. Besides, whatever had left those tracks was walking with a 9-foot stride, and we were not looking forward to greeting it in the woods. Now I've heard of Bigfoot and seen some footage, and I've seen some footprints that supposedly belong to the abominable snowman in the Himalayas. They went in straight line across the mountain slope in the middle of nowhere. This beast must have been casually sauntering around in the timber and trying to scrounge up some food. And I am sure they have a number of things to survive on. Maybe whatever in those decayed trees is just another one of the many things that it eats. This experience has not prevented me from going into the woods, with many winters having passed since this occurred, and to this day I have never seen another set of prints. Today's final encounter. I believe that hindsight is 20/20, so what must have happened on the rainy autumn night had actually started many weeks earlier. My parents owned a house in a relatively rural area of western Pennsylvania. They had inherited the house from my father's parents, who had recently passed. Back in the day, it had been a fairly good-sized dairy farm with 3 large outbuildings and plenty of grass. It was originally 175 acres, but that had been reduced to about 20 as bits and pieces were sold off during the years. The house itself had 9 large rooms and had been built in the style of a southern plantation. There hadn't been any dairy farming going on here for years, but it was a beautiful home with a wraparound porch that ran across the front of the house and partway down the 2 sides. My mother insisted on living alone on the farm after my dad had passed away. Initially, I had considered moving there with my wife, but my wife was not in favor of the idea. In order to keep the peace, my wife and I stayed in our current home, which is about 8 miles away from there. In the spring of 1981, my mother had started to make somewhat regular calls about a prowler lurking around her home. On some occasions, someone was even attempting to turn the doorknob prior to my father's passing. No such happenings were ever mentioned, nor had anything of the sort occurred while I was growing up there. I had run over there at all times of the day and night to check things out for her, but I was never able to find anything unusual. I responded to her calls on at least 20 different occasions over a period of only a few months, and she realized that this was becoming a burden to me. Had started to call the police instead. At some point, I spoke to the police about her, and one of the officers suggested that maybe she shouldn't be living alone there anymore. I was in total agreement, but in spite of the events, my mother would have none of it. The calls kept coming, so in late August, I told my mom that I was going to get her a dog. Now, my mom was in her late 70s. She liked animals, but she didn't feel like she could walk it properly or take care of it, so I suggested that we could have a trainer work with the dog so that she could let it out alone. All she'd have to do is open the door and let it out, and then let it back in again later. After much prodding, she agreed to my proposal, so we bought a beautiful German Shepherd from a local breeder, and she named him Freddie. After this, the nature of the calls changed. Instead, saying that she saw or heard someone, the call would always report that the dog was going crazy and barking or scratching at the door or window while trying to get out of the house, and this went on for a couple of months. Even though she had a dog, I was still going over there to calm her down and do a walk around the property. I told her to let the dog out if she heard something, and he would scare whatever it was off, but she would have no part of it. She thought he may get hurt. On one of the nights that I got a call, it was raining quite hard outside, and yet again she said that something was walking on her porch, and Freddie was going ballistic. When I arrived, I walked up to the door in the usual way, but I noticed wet, muddy prints going across the porch. They ran up and down the entire length of the porch, but they didn't have enough shape to be identified. I went into the house and asked my mother if she or the dog had been outside. She said that she let Freddie out prior to sunset, but that she had watched him go out, do his business, and then called him right back in the house. Now, I didn't tell her what I had just seen, but this entire ordeal had just taken a turn for the worst. There really had been something or someone on her deck that night. Knowing that, how could I possibly leave her alone now? I told her that she would either have to let Freddie out if she heard something, or she would have to move, saying that we got this dog for her protection and that she had to let him do his job. About a week had gone by and she hadn't called once, so I stopped by to see how she was doing. She told me that she wasn't going to call or bother me anymore, and I told her that she had to call if she felt like she was in danger. This entire situation had gone from bad to worse, and I was beside myself. Once again, I insisted that she let the dog out the next time anything happened. On my way back home, I stopped at the police headquarters and told them about the muddy prints on the decks. They said that I had to get my mother out of there, saying that it could have been a bear, and it might break in at some point. I agreed, but couldn't help thinking about her saying that something was walking by the windows. Bears don't walk on their hind feet. One stormy night in the fall of 1981, the phone rang, and I answered it. My mother had a scare and let Freddie out. She said that she heard him make a loud yelp outside, and that all the barking had stopped abruptly, after which she heard what she thought was a large branch falling on the roof. I drove to her home, went inside, and asked where Freddie was. She was crying hysterically. She told me that he had disappeared after the yelp, so I went outside and called him over and over, but he never came. I couldn't see anything. I told my mother to come and spend the night with us, that I could not leave her alone like this. The next day we returned to her house with my wife in tow. My wife took my mom inside the house while I stayed outside. As I was walking around towards the backyard, I noticed some large depressions in the grass. There were about 6 of them in a line, and they all held a bit of water. These were massive prints of some kind, and I put my fingers in one of them, and they were about 5 inches deep. I could see more shallow prints going out into the pasture, so I followed them out for a bit, but found nothing else. As I walked back toward the house, I thought about what my mother had said about a branch falling on the roof, so I looked up, wondering if I could see whatever it was from the yard. Lying in one of the roof valleys was Freddie's body, and I knew it immediately. I didn't tell my mom or my wife. We brought my mother back to our house, and in private I told my wife I would explain everything later. When I had some time alone, I returned to the house with a policeman. I showed him the dog and told him what had happened during the night. We put a ladder up to the house to get him down. He was so heavy that I had to drag him to the roof's edge and let him fall the rest of the way to the ground. The dog's head had been twisted all the way around, and he had been bitten several times by something. I dug a grave behind the barn, and we buried him together. The policeman took photos of both the dog and the depressions in the ground, and this was the turning point for my mom. She didn't know what I had found, but we convinced her to stay with us and sell the house. I've been wrestling with this mystery ever since. We all like to think that we have everything figured out, but when you stand there looking at a 125-pound dead dog that had been thrown up onto a 35-foot tall roof, you start to wonder if you know anything at all.
All right, folks, so that was today's bonus. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that keeps the channel growing and going, and honestly what gives people a chance and a place to share their experiences and theories judgment-free. Thank you. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, friends. These creatures are real. They are out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless.